Okay. Good morning, folks. Today's webinar is about what it takes to start and run a successful nonprofit. Mike DeLeo will be our speaker today, and in 2 minutes, we are going to start this webinar. Let's wait for a minute. Let all the attendees join this webinar so that Mike DeLeo can start.
My screen's still only showing the three of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will only show the panelists. It won't show all of the
Okay.
audience.
Okay. Should I?
Oh yeah, there's 11 participants I see down the bottom.
I don't see the participant, Adam. What should I do? I don't see the below bottom screen.
Yeah, so Sheila, in the participants box, if you click on attendees, you'll see the list of them.
Okay, okay. Oh no, I have now on the top, I can see, yes. This is a little bit different. So should I start?
Yep, 10 o'clock, let's start.
Yeah. Good morning, viewers. Today's webinar is about what it takes to start and run a successful nonprofit business. And today's speaker is Mike DeLeo. He is a SCORE mentor and workshop presenter. Let me talk about SCORE first, and then we can start the webinar. SCORE was formed in 1964 as a resource partner of the Small Business Administration, whose mission is to help aspiring entrepreneurs and existing businesses succeed. In Chester and Delaware counties, there are about 100 volunteers here to help small business owners. Our mentoring and many of our education programs are at no cost to you always. Our mission is to foster vibrant small business communities through confidential mentoring and education. And our vision is that every person has the support necessary to thrive as a small business owner. So today's presentation is being recorded and will be made available to you in the follow-up email from SCORE after today's session. You have been placed on mute to avoid any distractions. Please add your questions in Q&A box. Questions in the Q&A box will be responded to throughout the session at the end. Add any comments or references in the chat box. At the end of this webinar, there will be poll. I'll be launching a poll. Please reply to the polls so that we know what all things needs to be added or changed for your future webinars. So let me talk about Mike before starting the presentation. Let me give you a brief bio about his presentation. Mike has been in SCORE as a mentor for 4 years since he retired from DuPont after 40 years in financial management. Mike was on the board of a large nonprofit for 15 years and has experience in others, some that succeeded and others that failed. And he learned from this, and he's helping us to not make mistakes, what he has learned from it. So let's start the webinar. Mike, are you ready?
Yes, Sushil, I am. Thank you. And thank you for the kind invitation. Introduction. Good morning, everybody. Today, we're going to cover some topics all related to nonprofits. The beginning is going to be covering some of the key steps in starting a nonprofit. And that involves these 4 topics that you now see on the screen. Next chart, please. Then after we cover those, we're going to get into these topics, which really relate more to how you maintain and sustain a nonprofit through all the various things that can happen to you economically and from a business standpoint. So we welcome questions. We'll be pausing at the end of each of these sections to see if there's any questions that you'd like to ask at that point. And then at the end, we can also answer any other questions. So the point of this is to share what little we know and try to answer your questions. So please, participation is welcomed. In fact, I think it's essential to have a nice presentation. Next chart, please. Okay, so what is a nonprofit? A nonprofit is the organization that provides some type of public or community benefit without trying to profit. Now, I think probably everybody knows that, but basically essentials are it's for public benefit, not personal profit, and it's essentially owned by the public. So if an individual founds a nonprofit, they can be the executive director, they can be the founder, but they don't own it. No one individual or group of individuals owns a nonprofit. It's basically held in fiduciary by the state and with some guidance from the IRS. And also for a nonprofit, it's funded by donations, not investors, which again means that people freely give money to support the nonprofit. There are grants available where organizations like foundations would like to promote a certain social benefit. So they provide funds, but essentially, again, the money all comes in as essentially a free will donation, and there's no investors involved. The key fiduciary for a nonprofit is the board of directors. They have legal responsibility to make sure that the nonprofit is fulfilling its mission and staying within the bounds of the regulations of the state and also the Internal Revenue Service. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the board is the key kind of governance entity for nonprofits. So what kind of businesses and what kind of organizations are nonprofits? Well, as you can see, there's over, the next chart, please. Thanks, Sushil. Number 7. Great. So there's 62,000 nonprofits in Pennsylvania. And frankly, I think if we did a recap recently, there's probably many more. We're in the process of working with the Chester County Library to get a better idea of that. But it's a large number of organizations. And they have different types of missions. Some are religious organizations like churches or congregations. Some are human services organizations. I would put the hospitals and the Y and all that in that category, not the hospitals, but the Y and other organizations that provide social services, be they childcare or some kind of help to the community. Education, most colleges and schools are nonprofits. You also have associations such as, the chambers of commerce and all that. Healthcare, most hospitals are nonprofits. You also have art organizations and nature organizations. In Chester County, as I'm sure everyone's aware, there's a large number of areas that are put aside to limit development. Well, most of those organizations that do that, such as Natural Lands and others like that, are nonprofits, and they basically, their mission is to preserve as much green space as possible. So you got a wide range of activities. Again, the common denominator is they all benefit the public and don't benefit any individual or organization beyond that. Next, please. Slide 8, please.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about what it takes to get one started. Next slide, please. So to start a nonprofit, you have to decide on the mission and the purpose. The mission is really critical because the mission does several things. One, it helps you as an individual to know what the purpose of that organization is. The mission helps others understand, if they have an affinity for a certain cause, they could determine whether your nonprofit meets that cause, provides that social benefit. And it's critical to get donors and other people to understand what you're doing so they can give you money. But the defining reason is it's really the mission is distilled down to the purpose of why do you want to do this? That's really what it's about. And then from a business standpoint, can you see clear demand and ways to measure results? Now that's critical because it's like if there's a regular business selling a product or a service, you want to make sure that people want to buy the service. Well, in a nonprofit, they're not really buying the service, but they're going to provide money to help you perform the service. So in that way, they're supporting you. And ways to measure results is really important as well, because for grants and other organizations, foundations that give money, they want to know that their money is being used successfully to promote the cause. So it's really important that you, to the extent you can measure results. And basically, it's critical to attract funds and support of volunteers. Next slide, please. So how do you figure out your mission? Now, some of you may already be involved in nonprofits that have missions, and we'll talk about some of that later. But if you're just starting out, and most nonprofits are started by individuals with a lot of passion for a certain cause, it's really a matter of trying to find the intersection of what is it that you love? What do you love to do? What are you good at? And the third element, which is really where the social benefit comes in, what serves the world? What can you do that you're good at that is going to help the community? Next slide, please. So before getting started, you really need to ask yourself some questions, which again are kind of similar to if you're going to start a regular for-profit business. So are there other existing organizations with the same or similar mission? That's important because effectively you're going to be going after the same types of donations, and you want to make sure that what you're doing is additive and you're not somehow diluting what can be done, from an overall standpoint. If you're just starting a nonprofit and this is your first time, I think it makes a lot of sense to partner or join forces with an existing nonprofit, such as volunteering, because that way you can have a greater impact faster, because you'll basically be building on what they've done already. And essentially it requires less resources, time and money. To start a nonprofit doesn't take a great deal of money, but it does take some funds and some time. And you can always start your own after learning the ropes of working with another one. Next slide, please. Slide 12, please. Great. So to start, you need a plan and funding. So the plan would say, who, what, where, and how. SCORE, I'll mention, does offer courses and free mentoring on business planning. You can go to our website and you can see a large variety of live courses and also recorded webinars. And I would encourage you to look at those and see if there's some there that can be helpful to you. We also provide mentoring, which means you again go to the website, you register a request to have a mentor assigned, and then as Sushila mentioned, there's about 100 of us in the chapter and people with wide variety of backgrounds. And our administrative person does a great job of trying to match the requests that come in with the skills of the various mentors that are available. All this is done at no cost to you. Typically, the sessions last an hour, and they're available as often as you and the mentors can find mutually available time to do it. So it's really a nice thing because it's basically free, and we'll work with you as long as you want to. Now, beyond that, if you get back to the nonprofit, Typically, to fund a nonprofit, startup costs in Pennsylvania cost between $500 and $1,000 in filing fees. And it may be more based on your mission if you have to have certain certifications and things like that. But having a plan of what you're doing is critical to help guide you on this journey. Forward, please. It normally takes 2 to 3 months for state and federal approvals. For the state, you have to go to the One Stop's website for Pennsylvania. Federal approvals essentially is the IRS. You have to be considered a bona fide nonprofit, which means getting your 501 certification. And that's essential because others can't donate money to you if you don't have your federal IRS certifications that you're a bona fide nonprofit. So they're really critical. And there's a couple ways to do it. There's a simple way, they call it easy 1023, but that limits you to having a relatively small nonprofit, no more than $50,000 a year of income. If you need something higher than that, then you're better off just going ahead and getting a full-blown nonprofit. A little more time in the beginning, but it gives you a lot more flexibility down the road. You also could need, I'm sorry, back one, please. You also could need other certifications based on your activities. If you're doing childcare, then you need to have, all the licenses that are required in the county and in your township. You also need to make sure that any of the volunteers are fully vetted, especially if they're going to be in contact with children. If you're doing some kind of medical service, you obviously know you have to have licenses and certifications. The same thing if food's involved. So, it can get more complicated, but the two essential steps are getting registered with the state and with the IRS. Next, please. So to get started, you have to have essentially a legal entity, which in most cases would be an LLC, although it could be a corporation. There's opportunities to understand all that. In fact, SCORE offers a 1-hour seminar by a lawyer who basically goes through the various legal entity forms that are available and to kind of help decide, do you go to a relatively easy one like an LLC, or do you need something more complicated, which would be a full-blown corporation? In either case, you have to have articles of incorporation and bylaws. Those are essentially the legal documents that spell out the formation of the legal entity and the bylaws that will govern them. And bylaws are really important because, as I mentioned to you before, the board is essentially the responsible legal party for the operation of the nonprofit. What the bylaws do is specify who has which responsibilities. For instance, who sets the budget? Does the executive director set the budget, meaning someone who's in the nonprofit? Or does the board have to approve the budget? Typically, the board has most of the higher level authorities that are required to run the nonprofit. To attract highly qualified people on your board who want to help you, they need to like your mission, but also they need to know they're going to be in a meaningful role, because legally the board is responsible for what happens in the nonprofit and to make sure that you're doing everything in the proper way. You need an IRS determination letter, which is the 5013C that we talked about, and the Form 1023 in parentheses is easy. That's the form that's simpler, but it limits how big the nonprofit can be. And then you need a Pennsylvania state registration, which again, you go to the Pennsylvania One Stop website and it walks you through how you get registered and you go from there. So just pausing here for a second. Are there any questions on what we've talked about so far?
About slide 11, maybe mention fiscal sponsorship as an in-between start of nonprofit, not quite your own 501c, but also can engage in fundraising and service delivery. It's
That's an
from
excellent,
David.
Thank you, David. That's an excellent point. I'm going to touch on that in a minute, but let me just give a little comment now while we're here. So what a fiscal sponsor is a larger nonprofit, a foundation, for instance, can do it. And they essentially let you operate under their umbrella. So essentially, you don't need your own 501(c)(3). They have it, and you can operate under them. You can get donations and all that, and people who donate will receive the tax deduction. But you're essentially using their expertise and administration to help you get a faster start. Sometimes organizations will have a relationship with a fiscal sponsor until they get large enough to do it themselves, and others, frankly, stay with it. So again, we'll talk about some foundations later that do this, but it's a very good point because it allows you to get started on your mission without going through all the nuts and bolts yourself. Okay, if there's no other questions, let's move on.
One moment, please.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about volunteer and advisory resources, because it really does take a village to get a lot of this stuff done. Next slide, please. So most nonprofits are started by a few committed individuals, you know, someone who has a passion for the cause. Maybe they've had something in their personal life that's triggered them to want to do work in a certain area. But to operate successfully, you need more people, right? You need some money and you need more people. Again, the board of directors and the officers of the legal entity have the legal responsibility, but you also have employees, volunteers, and advisors. Now, employees, as you can imagine, are people that essentially work for the nonprofit. The leader of the nonprofit is typically the executive director. Those people get paid because they're working. They get paid from the donations that come in. So you can essentially make a career of working in a nonprofit. And it's a different than we're having a career in a typical commercial business, but you get compensated, you get benefits, you get everything else. Back, please. Also, volunteers. Volunteers are critical. Obviously, with a nonprofit, you don't have unlimited financial resources. You can't really go to the bank and borrow money. You can't get investors. So getting volunteers who, again, are committed to the mission, I can't say that often enough, are committed to the mission and willing to volunteer their time and talents to help you fulfill your mission. Depending upon what the mission is, you might have certain volunteers that have medical backgrounds, or maybe they have legal backgrounds, or maybe they have social service backgrounds. It all depends on the mission. And then you have a third or another category called advisors. And I'm a big proponent of this because basically an advisor has some particular expertise. Again, if it's an educational nonprofit, maybe they're educators or administrators. They could be physicians or nurse practitioners if it turns out that it's a medical type nonprofit. But essentially, they're bringing expertise, making it available to the leaders to get good advice, good sound advice, again, at no cost. Why is an advisor different than the board of directors? Well, the board of directors makes a commitment to have meetings periodically. It could be once a month, once a quarter. Again, they have legal responsibility to make sure the nonprofit is operating in a respectable way. An advisor is really there to be available when needed, to answer questions or provide advice on topics that are relevant to their particular expertise. Again, I think having a group of advisors is critical, so you have someone to turn to when you have a question. And people are more willing to be advisors than board members because basically it's less of a commitment on their part, but they still want to see you succeed and are willing to be there when you reach out for your questions. Next slide, please. So who should you look for among the volunteers and the board members and all that? Well, if they're employees, typically nonprofits are not able to pay as high a salary as a commercial business just because of less funding, and also there's a social element involved. That would be for employees, someone who's willing to work for perhaps less money than if they took their talents to a commercial business, but also they're getting a benefit because they're doing good with their time and they're trying to make the world a better place. Volunteers, you're really looking for people who are willing to volunteer their time for free. And again, you need a village, so you need a ton of these people. And then back to the board or as an advisor, again, there are two levels of commitments, but in both cases, maybe they provide money, they provide access to financial resources, they have expertise, again, could be a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor, an educator. They have networks of people. They are friends and have acquaintances that are perhaps have a similar interest in a certain mission being fulfilled. So you can use them to help spread the word among a larger group of people who can then provide support and resources to the nonprofit. And they probably have passion for the mission. Again, you want to do something, and as you find people, it really resonates with them, you want to grab hold of them because they can help you succeed. And you can, in order to find these people, you can contact community groups that support nonprofits. Next slide, please. So we're going to cover three of them. This one is based in Delaware County. It's called the Community Foundation. It's actually a legacy of the Taylor Hospital funding. It's basically based in Springfield. They provide scholarships, donor advised funds, which means people give them their money to invest in nonprofits. And the Community Foundation basically makes the decisions around where to invest that money. You see fiscal sponsorships is mentioned, which is what David alluded to before. So they're a very good organization, and they do a lot of good. Next slide, please. Another one in Delaware County is the Foundation for Delaware County. This is an organization that provides grants. They focus on women, children, and teen programs, public health programs. They provide resources to help support nonprofits, such as they run classes for leaders of nonprofits to help network and get more involved in the community. They have an advisor foundation partnership for donors, where again they help people target and put their money where the individuals would like to see the work done. Next slide, please. And Chester County has the Chester County Community Foundation. They again do similar things. They do grants, scholarships, donor advised funds, targeted fields of interest. So for instance, the Chester County Fund has people who say want to promote the welfare of horses, either horses that are in a retirement setting, like say Ryer's Farm, or horses that are being rescued from bad circumstances for them. So what people will do is give, and this applies to all of them, but will give the Chester County Foundation some money and say, we would like you to donate this money to organizations that promote the welfare of horses. It's like an affinity fund kind of thing. They also have other grants and all that are not restricted like that. But if you have a certain type of nonprofit and a mission, if you can find an organization that has money that's targeted for that mission, then you have a better chance of being successful and getting that money. Chester County Foundation also provides training program for nonprofits and their boards. They just announced a new one to help nonprofit leaders. And they're based in Westchester, but essentially work all over Chester County. Next slide, please. And SCORE is an affiliate of the Small Business Administration. We're not technically part of it, but we cooperate with each other. when the SBA was doing all the COVID programs and loans, we helped facilitate some of their community outreach. And in fact, one of the leaders from the King of Prussia office of the SBA was at a SCORE meeting earlier this week, because we do try to work with each other and try to be complementary around helping small businesses succeed. Frankly, they're mainly interested in for-profit businesses, but they do some work. They do have some programs that are open to nonprofits. Next slide, please. Are there any questions so far on It Takes a Village and resources?
About slide 11, maybe mention fiscal sponsorship as an in start, not quite your own 501c, but also can engage in fundraising and service delivery.
Right, thank you. Yeah, we covered that one. We're good there. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, let's talk.
Does the fiscal sponsor have to be nonprofit?
Yes. Yeah, they have to be an already certified nonprofit. And as part of that, part of their mission is to help other nonprofits get started without having to make all the, the detailed preparations themselves. Fiscal sponsors are oftentimes foundations, which again is a type of nonprofit.
What if a church wants to start a community outreach? Can the outreach work under the church, although they are separate entity?
I think it depends on the scope of it. So in general, I think the answer is yes. But, again, if the church is doing it and say they want to provide food for the needy, well, for people to make donations to help that cause, they're going to have to donate to the church. Whereas if they have a separate organization, LLC or something, that's a separate nonprofit that's focused on, feeding the needy, then they can probably find it easier to attract money from members that are not part of the church, right? Because it's like a standalone nonprofit that's supported by the church, but does things that are separate from what the church would do otherwise. That's just my personal opinion.
We can start the next slide because of the time shortage. And
please.
At the end, if we have time, we will go through all the questions, or otherwise the viewers can send the email and then Mike will answer all the questions.
Right. And we're about 2/3 through, so we're doing okay for time. Financial resources, please. Okay, so where does the money come from? Donations, which you'll see in a moment, are mainly coming from individuals. Grants. A grant is typically money that is available for nonprofits to meet a specific purpose. So the grant might be to promote social justice. It could be to promote early childhood education, but typically there's groups that want to promote certain activities, and they provide grants to organizations that will provide the service related to those activities. Now in here you see in parentheses, it says you can search links in the reference section. These charts, there's like probably 40 that we typically cover, but then at the back of the deck, which you'll receive, are reference charts that go into more details on a number of the topics that we're talking about. So again, you'll receive those charts. You can use them for references. And if you have any questions, as Sushila mentioned, you can reach out to me individually and I'll give you my email address before we sign off. Another place where nonprofits get money is fee for service. Probably the best example of this is the YMCA. Basically, people pay a monthly membership to join there. The YMCA has a program to help provide financial support for members who are not able to pay the full amount themselves. So it's essentially a business model that provides services and then uses the money that comes in from those services to try to promote a broader benefit in the community. And there's government support. This can be from the state, the federal government, the county, etc. but basically money is essential to fuel the mission of the nonprofit. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of where the money comes from. You can see that, you know, almost 70% comes from individuals. About 18% comes from foundations, which again, we alluded to 3 of them in the Chester, Delaware County area. You know, you've all heard of, you know, huge foundations like Bill Gates and all that. You know, there's a number of organizations out there that want to promote good, but it's a matter of finding what their area of interest is and see how that matches up with the mission of your nonprofit. A bequest would be people that name nonprofits for benefits in their wills when they pass away. And corporations also provide nonprofits as part of it, or provide money for nonprofits as part of their community development efforts. You'll see banks and all do this to try to help, you know, again, promote a good public image of their organization. The thing though is all these contributors want to see their donations have an impact in the community. This gets back to the thing I mentioned earlier about being able to measure results. Because typically, if you get a grant from a foundation, they're going to want you to report back to them on what happened as you spent their money to promote your mission. And sometimes nonprofits don't fully understand when they apply for a grant what kind of reporting requirements are required. But you know, that's something that's essential, and it really becoming more stringent as time goes on. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, you know, what's the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit business? I'm an accountant by training, and there's an expression, you know, apples and oranges, which means, are you comparing 2 things that can essentially be compared, or are they so different you're going to misunderstand what you get out of it? We'll talk about this for a minute. Next slide, please. So when you think about a for-profit organization, has sales revenue, cost of sales, salaries and benefits, and then essentially a profit or loss. When you deduct all the costs from the money coming in, did you have money left over? Did you have a loss? Well, for a nonprofit, the money coming in is in the form of donations, grants, and fees. The cost of sales is essentially program expenses. What does it cost for them to put out the services that they're providing? They do have salaries and benefits for their employees. And at the end of the day, you know, you have a typical, you'd have an annual budget. You see how that goes at the end of the year. Did you have more money come in than you spent, which would be a surplus, or do you have a deficit? And I mentioned in the, Sushil mentioned in the introduction that I've been involved with nonprofits that were successful and not successful. The typical major problem that a nonprofit has that's not successful is it starts to run deficits. And a deficit means you've spent more than you had coming in. And if you think about things like, you know, bankruptcy and all that, that's not something that you can sustain. So, you know, having a balanced budget is critical. But at the end of the day, if you have money left over, which is a surplus, instead of that being paid to shareholders, it is invested back in the nonprofit. It can be put in the bank for a rainy day. It can be invested in new programs, a number of things. But if there's a deficit, it's got to be funded one way or the other, or you can't keep going. And in both cases of nonprofits and for-profits, they need strong leadership to succeed, to be able to keep all this stuff moving in the right direction. Next slide, please. So one of the things about knowing in the right direction is knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Now, I'm sure most of you, if probably all of you, have heard of a SWOT analysis, where you organize an effort to look at the strengths and weaknesses of your organization. You look at the opportunities for growth, say, or the threats, which would be areas where you have an inherent problem. Maybe there's another organization around that's competing, or maybe you have a threat where there's some operating issues in your organization that need to be addressed. Next slide, please. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses knowing your strengths is great, but knowing your weaknesses can help you survive. And let's briefly talk about a SWOT analysis, which is, again, a valuable strategic tool to help you evaluate where you're going. Next slide, please. So why do a SWOT analysis? It helps strengthen your business plan because it helps you understand, where you can be successful and where you have to do some kind of efforts to mitigate what's going on. It can help navigate bumps in the road like losing donors or facing new competition, or perhaps a lower demand for your service. It can help guide expansion plans, which again is critical because a lot of times for nonprofits, if you want to spend significant money, say for a building or something, you have to have a capital program in order to do that. And it's really essential that you size it the right way so that you're going to be able to attract enough money to accomplish what it is you're trying to do. And essentially, it helps you see the potential implications of any kind of strategic initiatives. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? And what does it mean to get there? Next slide, please. So this is just a very simple thing about Wawa. I mean, everybody knows Wawa. So if you think about Wawa, they've had a number of expansion plans where they've both increased the number of stores in, the Chester County area, but they've expanded now and, they're in a number of the adjoining states. Well, what's the strength of Wawa? Well, I mean, it's basically convenience. Many locations, they offer fresh products. People are very comfortable with stopping there for gasoline or food, a snack, whatever. What's their weakness? Well, when they add all these other stores, they're essentially adding fixed costs because they've got more locations. Again, with the fresh food, they've got to worry about increased spoilage because they've got longer distances to travel to supply these different stores. The opportunity is that they can expand to other areas because they've got a very good business model. And it's likely that they're going to be more successful in areas where there's perhaps other chains that don't do as good a job. And also, as you've seen, Wawa's added more things to the menu options. Well, what's the threat from that? Well, they're again going into an area where they're going to have new competitors, and they're inherently making their supply chain more complex. They've got to get the products from their commissary to all the various stores. They've got more distances to go. They probably have to add additional regional, warehouses and things to supply. So, the point of this is when you're trying to do something like grow, you've got to look at what that really is going to do to your organization and how can you do it in a way that you can be successful at it. Next slide, please. So the basic concept is the same, whether it's a commercial business or a nonprofit. The key, though, is to make an honest assessment of where you are and your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, and use it to evaluate where you are now. Are you capable of doing this? And what likely implications will there be in the future from doing this? I had the opportunity to talk to the Western Chester County Chamber of Commerce last week about this. And the nonprofit leaders in the audience, all of them said the most important word on this chart is honest, because it's very difficult to look at your organization and your capabilities objectively. But it's essential to do that because otherwise, you're not really going to get the value out of a SWOT analysis that you need. You got to be critically honest with yourself. And it is critical for long-term success and growth, regardless of whether you have a for-profit or nonprofit business. Next slide, please. Any questions on the SWOT analysis?
Let me check the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
How is the foundation different from or similar for a nonprofit organization?
Foundation is typically an organization that provides money and resources to nonprofits. They typically don't provide a service themselves.
Do you have to register the nonprofit in the area you want to help? For example, if I register nonprofit in PA or New Jersey state, can I help others who live in Puerto Rico?
The answer is yes, you can, but you have to make sure again that if you're going to do business or operate in another jurisdiction, that you make sure that they don't have a requirement that you register there. So for instance, in Pennsylvania, they look at nonprofits and other legal entities as either being domestic or foreign. Well, domestic means they're based in Pennsylvania. Foreign means they're based somewhere else. Well, if you're going to be based in Pennsylvania and want to do something in Puerto Rico, you just have to make sure that Puerto Rico allows foreign, in that case, because you're not based in Puerto Rico, foreign entities to provide services in Puerto Rico. It's probably not an issue, but you have to make sure ahead of time you know what you're getting into.
Is there a Newcastle County Foundation that helps nonprofits with grants?
Newcastle County, Delaware, yes, there are. And, you know, I think you can, trying to think of, I mean, there's a number of large foundations in Delaware, you know, Longwood, Winterthur, things like that. But yes, there are. In fact, I lived in Wilmington for a long time, and there actually are organizations in Delaware that promote the success of nonprofits. So I would encourage this individual to do some networking and find out, you know, where those organizations are that promote nonprofits. But yes, the answer is Delaware does that, and they do it very well. The state also helps, you know, depending upon the mission.
One more question. If you have a surplus and file the 990 easy, how long can you roll that over?
Well, so for those on the call, the 990 is the annual report that a nonprofit has to make to the IRS. So I do not believe there's a time limit in terms of doing the easy process, but there is a size limit. So for instance, you can't do the easy application to the IRS. Again, I mentioned to you before, if it's above a certain amount, like I think it's $50,000 a year, you also can't have a legal entity like an LLC and register with the IRS as an easy applicant. So again, just look into it, but I do not believe there's a time limit that says once you're approved as an easy applicant, that it expires in 5 years or whatever. I think it's more you just can't get too big and you can't become a separate legal entity. We have about 10 minutes left. So
let us finish the webinar first, and then if you have any questions, we can move forward. Thank you.
We're near the end, but I just want to make
yeah.
sure everybody's aware of the time.
Yeah.
Okay, diversify revenue resources. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There you go. Whoops, no, go back one, please. 33, great. So what this really means is, typically when nonprofits start, they have a limited source of funding. You know, you have, you know, the person who's founding it, you go out and you find other organizations that want to promote you. You have individuals who want to make donations. Again, like almost 70% of the money comes from individuals. So that's kind of how you start. But there's some risks in that. And as you move forward, as opportunities present themselves, you want to look for new sources of funds. They could be more people, different people. Again, we talked about the board and the advisors networking with their you know, colleagues. So you want to try to get your money spread out so that you have a variety of places to get money. Because what happens is if you have individual donors, you know, they're obviously essential, but if they have a change in their economic circumstances, or perhaps they pass away, you know, all of a sudden you're not able to rely on that money anymore. So it's just basically a risk management approach to try to spread your donations out in as wide a range as possible, because that way you have more likely that if one goes down, maybe another one's coming up, and you can still, you know, keep things going. Plus also with economic cycles, we'll talk about that in a minute, but you know, essentially people's ability to donate becomes, you know, is based on their own personal, you know, circumstances. And if the stock market crashes or something, people may not be able to provide as much money as they had in the past. So again, having a wide variety of sources is important, and that gets into grants and foundations and everything else. Again, the main point is just try to get as broad a range of resources as you can. Okay, maintain focus on the key mission. Next slide, please. So, normally nonprofits start out with a focused mission, but as time goes on, that mission can expand over time. It's called mission creep, where basically you are starting out, providing services to one individual group or one individual need, but then, you want to do more, and maybe you have new people that come on the board that have ideas on doing more. You may have extra money, meaning perhaps you've had a good fundraising year and you have a surplus. Sometimes the leadership changes and the new person, wants to expand their impact. So there's a lot of reasons for this, but my caution is just to be very careful about changing your mission. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. So is mission creep a bad thing? Well, if you're doing it because you have extra money, that can dry up. Maybe the economy declines and you don't have that level of funding. And critically, you can lose support from those people who are committed to the initial mission. You attracted people in the beginning, and as they see you start to deviate from that, they may not be as interested in promoting that kind of a mission or that kind of a change in the mission. So you just have to be really careful. The essential thing is, what's driving the change? Does it improve the mission? Do you see that there's opportunities to fund these changes in the mission? Because what you want to do is have a sustainable organization, and you want to be careful with changes in the mission because you can put yourself in a difficult situation if people don't go with you, so to speak, when you change your mission. Next slide, please. And economic cycles. Next slide, please. So, nonprofits rely on the generosity of others. The old approach was the economy moves in 7-year cycles. That's debatable, but it still does ebb and flow. We all know that. Donations and grants are impacted by economic conditions. So to sustain operations in the long term, it's important that you manage to a balanced budget. Now, what that means is you do a budget a year in advance. You predict the money that's going to come in. You predict what it's going to cost to run the programs, pay the employees and all that. But if you get partway through the year and all of a sudden your donations dry up, what do? Well, if you're going to maintain some semblance of a balanced budget, you have to start to cut your expenses. Because if there's less money coming in, you have to make sure there's less money going out. Otherwise, you're going to run a deficit, and that's not good for the long-term health of the nonprofit. Another way to deal with this, though, gets back to the idea of trying to spread around where you get your money. And also, some sources of money are more resilient. For instance, if you get an annual grant from a foundation or some major donor, they're very likely to give you that full amount of money over the course of the year. So if the economics change and individual donors aren't able to give as much, if you can have a spread of grants and things like that tend to be more resilient. If you're getting money from a government, perhaps that's more resilient. So it's just a matter of trying to be smart about how you run the nonprofit so that you anticipate that there are going to be things that happen that you can't predict. But what do you do when that happens? And how do you make the nonprofit more resilient to those kind of situations? The key point is to know how much money is reliable, meaning when you're doing your annual budget, is this a 100% number or is this a 20% number? Is that aspirational? And then plan accordingly. And you just want to make sure, again, you can maintain some semblance of a balanced budget because you can't continue to have deficits year in and year out. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the end of the formal presentation. I think learning from others is critical. So, Sushil, I'd like to open this up if there's any questions in the chat box or any comments that people
Yes.
may have of areas of this that either
One
resonate
question.
with them, or they've had different experiences.
One question is, can you use a business loan, for example, PPP loan for startups costs and to register a nonprofit?
You'd have to look into the details of that, but my expectation is you cannot.
How is a foundation different from or similar to a nonprofit organization?
A foundation is typically, its main purpose is to fund nonprofits. So a foundation more than likely has a large amount of money, an endowment of some kind, perhaps a wealthy individual, decided to seed the foundation with money. And what the foundation does is look around at the nonprofits in the area and determine which ones they'd like to support. And then they work with those nonprofits by giving them funding to help promote their programs. Whereas a nonprofit is really more, kind of rubber on the road, providing a service or something directly to the public. The foundation is one step back. They help make the nonprofit successful in completing its mission.
The next question I have is, I don't understand this question. What type of permit is needed? CAL and LIC become a non-profit. CAL and LIC can become a non-profit.
I'm not quite sure either, but basically, if you have an LLC that's a for-profit business, it's difficult to convert that into a nonprofit. You would start a new LLC that would be essentially registered as a nonprofit. And that way you're starting from a clean sheet of paper, so to speak. For licenses and stuff, again, in the reference documents at the end of this, Pennsylvania has a really good one-stop shop for registering with the state Department of State, and they walk you through what's required. But again, as I mentioned earlier, depending upon your township or county, you may need additional licenses and certifications that are specifically related to your mission.
Now, if anyone else have any question, you can privately email to Mike and he will surely answer you in detail. So let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, excuse me though, just while you're on that point. So my email at SCORE is Mike.DiLeo, DILEO, at scorevolunteer.org.
I can put it in the chat.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Can you repeat, Mike?
Yeah, it's Mike.DiLeo, DILEO, at scorevolunteer.org.
Okay.
And you can also reach me through the SCORE website if you want to set up mentoring or something. But again, we have, a number of volunteers, so we can pretty much match you with your need and the person that's qualified to help you. Okay, Sushila, I'm sorry, back to you.
It's okay.
Yeah, there's the SCORE website.
Yeah, here's the SCORE website, and on request from the, if you want a mentor, you can schedule an appointment with a mentor, and according to your preference, what categories in which department you need help, you can fill the appointment schedule, and then from there, your preferred method of communication, whether it's video, email, phone, text, it will be helpful for the mentors, and those who are trying to schedule, they will schedule and they will try to communicate. Select a date and time from the available appointment on the calendar. And if you require a different date and time, please call us and mention you attended today's webinar. And if you have any questions, or if you want to provide any feedback, which will be helpful for the next webinar speaker to change or require as per your needs, we will definitely do that. So for that, I'll be soon launching a poll, and you can help us in that. The office of SCORE is Chester County Government Services Center, 601 West Town Road, Suite 281, Westchester, PA 19382. To get general information, you can call 484-356-8624. And the contact email ID is contact.0544@scorevolunteer.org. Website is https://CHESCODELCOSCORE.org.
Great.
So
And again,
now
we welcome your feedback, please.
yes, in the meantime, I'm going to launch the poll. Please fill the poll so that we will know how we did and what all we need to make the changes for. And we
Great.
thank Mike very much for providing us such educational information. This was very helpful, and those who are new, they can always, if they want to start a business or start a nonprofit organization, they can always reach out to Mike by email, by phone. He will surely help you. And that's the end. And I also want to let you know that SCORE will be emailing all registrants with a link to this recording, so that whenever you want to view 3 or 4 times to see if you have understood what Mike was talking about, because sometimes when we are new, we do not understand at one stretch, one go. So you can hear the recordings, view the recordings again and again to get used to it if you are really interested. That's the end of this webinar. And if you have any questions, please do share.
Yes, and please feel free to reach out to my email if you want copies of the charts, and I'll send them to you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to stop this video recording. Thank you, Mike. Sorry for the slide, little bit like it was slow. I was
fine.
trying with my keyboard, but then it was not going through. Then I had to use my mouse.
Okay. No, I thought it was as good as all of them. So thanks for your help. I appreciate it. And Adam,
Thank you.
thanks for your help too.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. That was a great presentation, and to Sushila, great job. And it'll get easier each time you do it.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Cool.
Mike, if you are next time doing anything, if you want me to be your moderator, I'm always there to help you.
Great. Thank you for the kind offer.
Thank
Oh,
you. Thank you,
okay.
Adam. Thank
Enjoy the
you,
rest of your
Mike.
day, guys.
Okay.
All right,
bye-bye.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Stop sharing.